Right. Hello. Hi. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Right. Right. We're just going to get started with our third lesson in this series. So today we're talking about AI chatbots. And I've put some questions in the description box. Hopefully you guys can see those and have a think about those questions. So have a think about those two questions that are there. I'll just read them out for you in case you guys can't see them. So it's, do you think technologies like ChatGPT positively or negatively impact education? And then the other question that you can think about is, in your experience of using ChatGPT, have you found its answers to be creative? So those two things that we want to think about. So have a look at those questions in the description box and have a think what you think about how you would answer those questions. You can just think about them to yourself, or if you want to share your thoughts, you can also let me know in the chat what you think. So if you have used ChatGPT before, let me know. I imagine that most people by now have used ChatGPT. You can let me know also if you have used it, or if you've never used it before, you can tell me in the chat, because I'd be interested to know if you have or haven't used it. But it is a very, very fast growing technology that's used by a lot of people. So today we're going to be thinking about that, not just ChatGPT, but other types of chatbots too. If you guys don't know what a chatbot or an AI chatbot is, it's basically just an AI that you can talk to, right? It's sort of like texting someone. So you type a message and the AI responds. So that's what a chatbot is. So we're going to be thinking about different types of chatbots, right? Here we have a bunch of logos. If you guys want to have a think about which logos you recognize, if there's any that you recognize, feel free to let me know. If there's any you see, you probably know the ChatGPT logo, but there's lots of other logos on here as well, and other pictures of other chatbots. It's not just ChatGPT, although it's the most famous one. There's other ones by other search engines, like Google's one. So there's Bard AI, there's Bing by Microsoft, there's Ernie by Baidu, which is a Chinese search engine. So there's all sorts of chatbots, but they all do very similar things. You may also have seen the Snapchat AI, so that's the one in the top right, which again is sort of does a similar thing, doesn't it? It's just a chatbot that you can chat to. That's the general idea. But today we're going to mostly be focusing on ChatGPT. And that's mainly just because it is so prevalent. But all the issues and benefits that ChatGPT can bring that we're going to talk about are all applicable to all the other ones. So we are going to be talking more about ChatGPT, but really all the problems, they apply to both of them, right? So we're going to be thinking about all the issues that come along with ChatGPT. I'm interested to know if there's any that you guys can come up with, just in maybe your experience of using chatbots, whether it's ChatGPT or Bing or Snapchat AI, any of those that you may have used. If you guys have encountered any problems or anything that you think could be a problem, either for you guys or just for society, any issues that you think chatbots have, or even any positives, if you guys think there's any benefits that they bring. I mean, they're widely used, so clearly people must think that they're positive in some way. I know that they can have a very positive impact on the way I do work when they're used properly. But we're going to be talking all about that today. So let's get started and just talk firstly about ChatGPT. And right before I do, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself again in case there's anyone new here today. So hello, my name is Caterina, and I study computer science and AI at the University of Edinburgh. And yeah, this course is all about just teaching you guys about different applications of AI. So last week we looked at AI and creativity. So that was AI applied in music, film, art. And today we're looking at AI chatbots. But the idea is every week we're going to look at a new application of AI. I try and make it as non-mathsy as possible and as accessible to all. Because no matter what you're interested in, AI is probably going to affect your passions and your interests and your future job. So it's all about just understanding, in a very broad sense, what the future is going to look like with AI. And that's exactly what we're doing today with chatbots. So let's talk a little bit about ChatGPT. And do let me know if you guys, how much you guys use it, if you have used it before, because I'm interested to know. But I do know it's very prevalent with students. So in case for those of you that maybe haven't used it before, let's just do a quick introduction to what it is. So it's developed by a company called OpenAI, and it's actually been around for a long time. It's not as new as people think. It's just that before it wasn't open to everyone, and that's why people have this impression that it's a new thing. but it actually isn't. And yeah, it's just designed to engage in conversational interactions. You chat with it and it gives you responses. Something that not everyone knows is that it doesn't have real-time awareness. So its cutoff point is September 2021. So if you try to ask it about something that's happened recently, it might not be great at giving you answers. It actually doesn't know anything after that point. And that's all to do with how the actual technology works. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about how it actually works. And it ties in a little bit with what we were talking about last week. So if you guys were here last week, we were talking about just stuff like DALL-E and Midjourney. So it's all softwares that develop digital art, right? AI that develops digital art. And we talked about how the way that it works is it's shown so many images. It's shown millions of pieces of art and millions of images, and it learns patterns. And that's very similar to how ChatGPT works, is that it's shown millions and millions and millions of sentences, and it starts to pick up patterns. But in terms of knowledge and how much it knows, that's a bit of a difficult question to answer, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So this graph I think is very interesting. Hopefully you guys can see it relatively clearly. So it shows how much time different online services took to get to 1 million users. So you can see that something like Netflix took over 3 years to get 1 million users. Even Instagram took 6 months. It took ChatGPT 5 days to get its first 1 million users. It's the fastest growing app of all time. Nothing has ever grown as fast in terms of users as ChatGPT. So yeah, it's definitely really taken the world by storm. It's become incredibly popular. And that ties into a lot of about how it works and how it has so many different applications that so many different people can find it useful. So let's talk a little bit about how it actually works. So I don't know how much you guys have already heard about this. You may have heard different things in the internet about how it works. I know there's a lot of misinformation about it. But the way I think is best to think about it, just in a broad sense, is if you think about autocorrect on your phone, right? So if you type a sentence, I have an example here on the right. So I'm going to it gives you some suggestions of what you could write next. So you can see it has gym, grocery, beach. So just a few suggestions of what you could write. So the way ChatGPT works is very similar. So it tries to predict your next word when it's generating a response. And I have a breakdown here on the next slide. But you don't have to know all these details, but I think just for the people that might be interested, it's interesting to see the actual steps in a very broad sense. So you give your message, that's the input. It's then converted into numbers. Don't worry too much about that. It's just that it's basically easier for computers to interpret everything in numbers. So the words are turned into a numeric representation. The really important step is number 4, the word generation. The key thing to understand is that when ChatGPT generates a response, it's generated word by word, right? So what that means is that when it's picking the next word to generate, it's based on what you have asked, and it's also based on the patterns that it's learned during training. So if it's seen certain sentences millions of times, then it's more likely to generate that as the next word than something it's only seen once or twice, right? So actually it's all probabilities. That's essentially how it works, is it predicts the next word based on a probability of what's most likely to come next. And then that word becomes part of the prompt, and then that process is repeated for every single word that it generates within a prompt. I think it's important to understand that, and to understand that it is all probability, rather than actually understanding what it means. I think that's just important to understand, because sometimes people have kind of a wrong understanding of what it means for something for ChatGPT to actually understand. So someone asks, what is someone asking? Someone's asking, what does GPT stand for? Yeah, that's a really good question. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And it's basically just the model that ChatGPT is trained on, is called that. And so there's different versions of it you may have heard of. So you might have heard of GPT-3, GPT-4, GPT 4.5. It's just different versions, kind of like how, iOS, right, which is Apple's operating system, right, there was iOS 1 and then 2, 3, 4, and now I think we're on I don't know what we're on, maybe like 16 or something. It's the same idea, right? So it's their model that they have generated. That's what we were talking about the pattern matching, that creates and generates the next words. Right, so that's a little bit about how it works. And then this moves us into our next section, which is about the problems that come along with this technology. And that's what I was talking about when I was saying that people overestimate how much ChatGPT understands sometimes. So you may or may not have heard about this problem of hallucinations. And hallucinations is really just a fancy word for sometimes ChatGPT completely makes things up out of thin air, because of the way it's just essentially generating what word it thinks is most likely to come next without an actual understanding of what's real and what's fake. So here I have an example, right? So this guy called Noble Ackerson, he decided to essentially check on ChatGPT what would come up if he typed his name in. So he wrote, "Who is Noble Ackerson?" And ChatGPT gave him this response and told him that he was dead, and also gave all sorts of other fake information. So all the stuff highlighted in red is false information that ChatGPT generated when this guy asked ChatGPT who he was. So this is just an example of how ChatGPT can make up completely false things, right? And even say that someone who's very much alive is dead, even though that's very easy to just check by Googling. Because it's not connected to the internet. It's just generating things based on a probability. And sometimes its answers seem very impressive, but it's important to remember that it is just based on essentially what word is most likely to come next. And that's why it doesn't have an understanding of what's real and what's fake. And this can generate very big problems, because it's basically weighing, say, a sentence that it's found in a research paper and a sentence that it's read in a novel, with the same weight in terms of how true that sentence is. It doesn't have an understanding of what's real and what's fake. And that's a very, very big problem in the industry. And, here this is sort of a non-problematic example. It's not necessarily a huge issue for, if someone thinks you're dead. Obviously, it's not great, but there's actual really serious issues when it can be defamatory, right? So maybe ChatGPT accuses someone of a crime that they've never committed, right? And that becomes an issue at that point. And that's something that the industry is trying to work to prevent these hallucinations. And there's also other cases of stuff like lawyers using ChatGPT to do their work, which they probably shouldn't do in the first place. And then ChatGPT generating fake cases and then these being used in an actual court of law. So there's all sorts of problems that come along with this happening. And I have another example here. Oh, hang on, let me just move that over. So another example here, this is a personal example that happened to me. Hopefully you can see that. So I was using ChatGPT to help me find some articles. So I was struggling for a personal project to find more information on the internet. So I asked ChatGPT if it could help me find some papers. And hopefully you can see it here, but it gave me this title, right? So Measuring Urban Neighborhoods, a Study of Spatial Clustering, Social Diversity and Economic Segregation in England. It gives me a whole title, it gives me a journal it's from, and then when I go to search it up, can't find it anywhere. I can't find this journal, I can't find this person who's supposedly written it, and I can't find this title anywhere. And it turns out that this just didn't exist, right? Because again, it's just based on a probability and what's most likely to come next. It doesn't actually have a necessary understanding of what's real and what's fake. So it can completely generate things out of thin air. So you need to be very careful when you use it. And it's fine to use it, but always fact checking and always double checking if you're using it for research that it's giving you something factual, which obviously you should be doing anyway if you're doing good research. And there's all sorts of other dangers, which you may have seen in the news. So another danger is that it can give sensitive or classified information or dangerous information, such as making a bomb or how to shoplift, all this sort of stuff. And this is all for, very problematic things that need to be dealt with. And I think OpenAI is doing a lot of progress with preventing this sort of information being asked. But people find ways around it. But these are all the sorts of things that are being dealt with at the moment and are very similar to the same types of problems that came along at the beginning of the internet, where suddenly so much knowledge was just open and available to so many people that it's very hard to control. And it's sort of the same thing happening now. But with time and with more legislation, this is all just happening now. It's so new. But as time goes on and more legislation starts to kick in, these are the types of issues that will be dealt with. But at the moment, it is definitely a very serious danger. Okay, and then another danger is bias. So here on the left is an image of the political compass test, which you may or may not have heard of. It's just a political test, very famous political test you could do to see where you lie on the political spectrum. And you can see that this test has been applied to ChatGPT, and you can see that it's essentially in the bottom left box, so left libertarian, which some people think is an issue. So some people say that ideally it should, be as center as possible, that a technology shouldn't be biased in any direction and should be exactly in the center. And some progress has been made on that. So I believe this is GPT-3, but the new version, GPT-4, is much more in the center. So OpenAI is trying to do a lot of progress to try and make it as unbiased and objective as possible. But again, these are issues that are quite tricky to solve. And again, remember that this is all being trained on human data. So if humans have bias, then this bias will then be perpetuated into the AI. And I think that's also an important thing to remember, is that it's not so much the AI being biased. It's not like it has sentience. It's just that it's reflecting bias that was in its training data, so human bias, which is being continued into the software. And then here on the right, hopefully you can see that. It does seem a bit blurry. But yeah, this is ChatGPT on gender stereotypes. So what this researcher did is they asked ChatGPT to write some generic performance reviews for some different jobs. So for example, someone asked ChatGPT, write me a performance review for a kindergarten teacher. And then they would look at the responses and see what pronoun was used. So did the response use a she, they, or he? And what you can see is that for example, for kindergarten teacher, 100% of the responses said she. And for something like construction worker, 100% of the responses said he, but other ones were mostly they. So that's interesting to note. Again, it's not the AI itself being biased. It's more that human bias that's then being perpetuated through the data that it's been trained on. But again, so that's just another example of potential issues. Again, this is maybe more harmless, but this could then be perpetuated and become a serious issue if it's not dealt with at the source. So again, that's another issue that chatbots have. And then one big issue that I'm sure all of you guys have heard of is plagiarism. And this is a very serious issue in education. So yeah, you can see here 89% of students admit to using OpenAI's ChatGPT for homework. And this is one of the big ones, especially because at the moment it's quite hard to detect when AI has been used, although there is detection software, but it's not foolproof. But I think it also, and this is something that I want you guys to think about, and I'd be very interested to know your thoughts. It definitely begs the question of what should education be like, and do we need to rethink education and remodel it in a way that it's less about testing information when information is so readily accessible on things such as ChatGPT and just the internet in general. And I wonder if you guys think there's a way to work with these technologies rather than seeing them as something negative for education. And that's what I was asking at the beginning, right, in the question in the description box about whether AI is a negative influence on education or a positive influence on education. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on whether you think it's positively or negatively impacts education. There's definitely a case for both things, I think, and for seeing how, the plagiarism is obviously an issue, but that maybe in some ways it can be useful for education. And we're going to watch a video in a little while that looks at maybe some of the positive ways in which AI could be used for education. But right before that, I have another graphic. Now, I fear that's not going to be very easy to read. Let me see if I can zoom in. Does that work? Oh, I'm not sure how clear that is. Hopefully it's clearer on you guys' screen than mine, but I'll just describe it to you guys in case you can't see it very well. So what this is it's a graphic showing how smart is ChatGPT. So what does that mean? So essentially, ChatGPT was tested on a whole bunch of tests. So hopefully you can see that. So it's the LSAT, which is a law test, biology, statistics, psychology. It's a whole bunch of tests. It's all American tests. Unfortunately, they haven't run this on UK tests like A levels or GCSEs. I wish they did, because it would make a lot more sense to me, and it would be interesting to see how ChatGPT would perform, say, on maths A level or something. But it still gives you a good indication, right? And what this shows is, so the blue dots show how GPT-4 performs, which is the newer version, and the sort of turquoise dots show you how GPT-3 performed. And so what it means, so for example, at the top it says 99th. That means that ChatGPT performed in the 99th percentile, which means that it did better than 99% of other students taking the exam. So you can see that it does pretty well with some stuff, right? It does well in this GRE, so verbal tests. It does well in this SAT, so reading and writing. I think it's SAT because it's, the American one. The bar exam, right, it scores in the 90th percentile in the bar exam, which is quite impressive, in statistics. But you can see that it starts doing badly in other things. So for example, in calculus, 43rd percentile, again, ChatGPT not as good as doing maths. English language, 14th percentile, so very poor performance. English literature, also not good. And coding, not very good. So it does amazingly in some stuff and very poorly in other stuff. So doesn't do as well in everything. And it's interesting to me that it doesn't do as well in something like English language and English literature, where I think it is a lot more about your ideas, versus something like law, where it's a lot about memorizing and just applying knowledge. So I think there is a case for the fact that maybe it's not as good as coming up with creative ideas. But that's something that I want you guys to think about. In your experience, have you found that ChatGPT can help you be more creative or give you creative ideas, or do you think that that's something that humans are a lot better at? But these results and these benchmark tests, even though it's not completely accurate to just test ChatGPT based on tests, but I do think it's interesting. It does show that ChatGPT does perform very well in some tests and doesn't perform very well in others. Right, so the last thing that we're going to look at today is this video that I wanted to show you guys, which is about whether AI could maybe benefit education. And now I'm zoomed in because I zoomed in, but hopefully I can zoom out a little bit. So we're going to have a look at this video, because recently there's been a lot of coverage in the news about how AI could maybe be negative or be a threat to education and our education system. And this is a TED Talk by the founder of Khan Academy, which you've probably heard of, right? Khan Academy is a huge education software. And he talks about how actually AI could be an opportunity to improve education, rather than something that can threaten it, and actually improve it and make it much better. So we're going to have a look at this video and have a look at what he has to say. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play the beginning, and then I'm going to skip to another bit, because there's two sections that I want to show you. So if you see it skipping suddenly, that's because I just want to show you the other bit as well. Cool, so we're going to have a look at that.
So anyone who's been paying attention for the last few months has been seeing headlines like this, especially in education. The thesis has been students are going to be using ChatGPT and other forms of AI to cheat, do their assignments, they're not going to learn, and it's going to completely undermine education as we know it. Now, what I'm going to argue today is not only are there ways to mitigate all of that, if we put the right guardrails, we do the right things, we can mitigate it, but I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor, and we're going to give every teacher on the planet an amazing artificially intelligent teaching assistant. And just to appreciate how big of a deal it would be to give everyone a personal tutor, I show you this clip from Benjamin Bloom's 1984 Two Sigma study, or he called it the Two Sigma problem. The Two Sigma comes from two standard deviations, sigma the symbol for standard deviation, And he had good data that showed that, look, in a normal distribution, that's the one that you see in the traditional bell curve right in the middle, that's how the world kind of sorts itself out, that if you were to give personal one-to-one tutoring for students, that you can actually get a distribution that looks like that right. It says tutorial one-to-one with the asterisk, like that right distribution, a 2 standard deviation improvement. Just to put that in plain language, that could take your average student and turn them into an exceptional student. It can take your below average student and turn them into an above average student. Now, the reason why he framed it as a problem was he said, well, this is all good, but how do you actually scale group instruction this way? How do you actually give it to everyone in an economic way? What I'm about to show you is, I think, the first moves towards doing that. Obviously, we've been trying to approximate it in some way at Khan Academy for over a decade now, but I think we're at the cusp of accelerating it dramatically. I'm going to show you the early stages of what our AI, which we call Khanmigo, what it can now do, and maybe a little bit of where it is actually going. So this right over here is a traditional exercise that you or many of your children might have seen on Khan Academy. But what's new is that little bot thing at the right. And we'll start by seeing one of the very important safeguards, which is the conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. It's moderated actually by a second AI. And also, it does not tell you the answer. It is not a cheating tool. Notice, when the student says, tell me the answer, it says, I'm your tutor. What do you think is the next step for solving the problem? Now, if the student makes a mistake, and this will surprise people who think large language models are not good at mathematics, notice, not only does it notice the mistake, it asks the student to explain their reasoning, but it's actually doing what I would say not just even an average tutor would do, but an excellent tutor would do. It's able to divine what is probably the misconception in that student's mind, that they Now, to even more directly hit this use case, and what I'm about to show you, everything I showed you so far is actually already part of Khanmigo. What I'm about to show you, we haven't shown to anyone yet. This is a prototype. We hope to be able to launch it in the next few months. But this is to directly use AI, use generative AI, to not undermine English and language arts, but to actually enhance it in ways that we couldn't have even conceived of even a year ago. This is reading comprehension. The student's reading Steve Jobs' famous speech at Stanford. And then as they get to certain points, they can click on that little question, and the AI will then Socratically, almost like an oral exam, ask the student about things. And the AI can highlight parts of the passage. Why did the author use that word? What was their intent? Does it back up their argument? They can start to do stuff that, once again, we never had the capability to give everyone a tutor, everyone a writing coach to actually dig into reading at this level. And you could go on the other.
Right, okay. So hopefully you could hear that video fine. Yeah, so I think it's interesting. And I think it gives a good perspective on the flip side of the coin, right? That it's not all just about plagiarism. And that actually, when used the right way, this technology, this AI technology and AI chatbots could actually bring a lot of benefit to education. I'm interested to know what you guys thought about that video, if you see it the same way and you see it as something that could benefit you and could benefit your learning. From my perspective, I definitely think that for students that maybe don't have, as he says in the video, as much one-on-one access, right, to teaching, this could provide it, or it might never be as good, but it could definitely help students and help education. And I think it comes back to the same thing that we really talk about in every session, doesn't it? That there's always a flip side of a coin. It's always a double-edged sword, but there's definitely ways in which this technology can be harnessed in interesting ways. But I'd be interested to know what you guys think about it. So now we have some time for questions, if anyone has any questions, or just any thoughts that they want to share on what they think about AI's benefit in education and ChatGPT's benefits for society, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing that you think it brings. So if you guys have any questions, I'll be around for a few minutes for you guys to ask. And you guys can have a think about your thoughts on what we discussed today. If you guys have any ideas, feel free to share. I'll wait a little while if anyone has any ideas. And then, yeah, that's it for today. If anyone doesn't have anything to share. Cool. Right. I'll just wait a little while longer. In the meantime, let me just explain for anyone who maybe wasn't here last week how these sessions run. So there's 5 more sessions left. There's 8 in total. And as I said at the beginning, each session we're looking at a different application of AI. So today was AI chatbots, and they always run at the same time. So 30 minutes, and we're looking at something different every week. So Wednesday, 4 p.m. every week for the next 5 weeks. So yeah, lovely to see you, everyone. Bye-bye. It's a pleasant saying bye. Thank you for coming along, and I'll see you guys next